good morning, everyone. I'm Alicia Phillip. I'm president of the Community Foundation, and I thank you so much for being with us today. So bright and early on this absolutely gorgeous day. And we're sorry we had to put down the shades, but we do because we're going to do a presentation. But when we can, we'll put them back up because this is one of the most beautiful views in all of Atlanta. And we're so pleased to be here today at the Rollins School of Public Health in this gorgeous new building. And in a few moments, Dr. Curran will be with us, who's the Dean of the Rollins School of Public Health, to say a few words. And we do want to thank him and Catherine Graves, who works with him very much for making this possible for us to be here. It's a perfect setting for this. I'd also like to thank Kaiser Permanente, who made this morning possible. Yvonne Yancey, who is the Director of Community Benefit and Community Affairs, couldn't be here today, but Kaiser has been working with the Community Foundation to help us educate donors about health issues, because they're particularly interested in seeing that donors really understand and become knowledgeable about the changing health issues in our community. And I'm very pleased with all of our panelists, and we'll hear from each of them in a minute. Dr. Gary Miller, who we get to visit his lab later, Sandra Lacefield, Nancy Morrison, my dear friend and colleague, Patty Johnson, who used to run the Foundation Center Library in the Hurt Building, so we used to see each other a lot, and our special friend, board member and donor, Dr. Satcher. Dr. Satcher is also not only on the board of the Community Foundation, a donor of the Community Foundation, he's the co-chair of our AIDS leadership team that is really looking at how we can make a difference in AIDS going forward in the future. And in a minute, I'll turn it over to Barrett Christ. Don't think I ignored her here. I know, I would never ignore Barrett. As many of you know, between 2000 and 2015, the older adult population is going to double. And by 2030, 1 out of every 5 residents will be over the age of 60. And healthcare is a very important issue to our donors who advise grants from the Community Foundation. Last year, we made $99 million in grants, and 30% of those were for healthcare. So it is a major issue, something that donors are very concerned about. And today we're going to hear a number of different perspectives from the panelists, and each in some ways going to focus on the critical needs of seniors. And what we're hoping is that as donors, you will think about how health and aging is changing in this community and how different approaches can be used. I mean, hopefully we'll learn what some of the critical issues are that are facing seniors, what are the resources needed to address these, and what ways we can each make a difference. After today's event, if you want to learn more, please talk to your philanthropic advisor. Erin is here, and Barrett is here, and Audrey is here, and Rob Smullion's not here. He's on spring vacation with his kids, but he'll be back in the office on Monday. We are videotaping this session so that we can make it available to donors through other means who weren't able to be here today. And for those of you who are donors to the Community Foundation, please note that on June 2nd is our donor appreciation event, and we're going to have Dave Isay, who is the founder of StoryCorps, as our speaker for that, and you'll be getting more information about that. And now I'd like to turn the program over to my colleague, Barrett Christ, who's a philanthropic advisor with the Community Foundation, who will be the moderator for today's panel.
We want to welcome you all to our Health and Aging panel, and I'm going to take a few minutes to briefly introduce our fabulous panelists. Their complete bios are in your packet, so I'm not going to read those all off, and we'll be here all morning. So we'll start to my immediate left here, Dr. David Satcher. He's the head of the director of the Satcher Health Leadership Institute and the Center of Excellence on Health Disparities, and the 16th Surgeon General of the United States. Dr. Gary W. Miller, who's the Professor of Environmental Health and Associate Dean for Research at the Rollins School of Public Health, and the Director of Parkinson's Disease Environmental Research Center. Sandra Lacefield, oh, nope, we're out of order. Nancy Morrison is the Director of the 60-plus Older Adult Services at Piedmont Hospital. And then to her left, we have Sandra Lacefield, who is the Housing Coordinator for Quality Living Services. And finally, our friend Patty Johnson, who is a consultant for the Engagement Initiative. And I'm Barrett Christ, the philanthropic advisor. And I would like to go ahead and start and ask Dr. Satcher if you would like to get us started on our panel.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be with you to discuss this very important topic of healthy aging. I bring you greetings from the Satcher Health Leadership Institute at the Morehouse School of Medicine, where our major role, of course, is trying to develop a new generation of leaders in public health who will especially take the lead in our quest to eliminate disparities in health. Before I returned to Atlanta to serve in the role I'm serving now, of course, I had the opportunity to serve as Surgeon General and Assistant Secretary for Health. And it was really as Assistant Secretary for Health that I had the responsibility for leading the development of Healthy People 2010, where we had only two goals. And one goal you've heard a lot about, the goal of eliminating disparities in health among different racial, ethnic, socioeconomic groups. But the other goal was to focus on improving the quality of life in this country, not just the years of life that people live. As you know, we have made dramatic progress in life expectancy in the United States. The CDC, of course, has tracked that, and several years ago reported that the fastest growing group of people in America were people over 80 years of age, and projected that by 2030, over 20% of the population would be over 65 years of age. So we are, in fact, quote, an aging population. So I think it's very important to put aging in perspective, and I love the topic, healthy aging. Aging is not a disease, even though some people think so. In fact, there was this story, I'm sure you've heard it, about the 84-year-old man who went to the doctor because he was having severe pain in his left knee. And the pain had come on in the last month or so. So we saw the doctor, and the doctor examined him, and he said, well, Mr. Jones, I mean, you know, you're 84 years old, so you have to expect these things. And Mr. Jones said, well, doc, my right knee is 84 also, and it's not hurting. And I think there's a message there, of course, is that we have to look at the opportunities for good health in aging, even though aging represents a major change. Just like newborn, when babies are born, major challenges to their health in the first year of life, and so infant mortality is something we track. Adolescence, of course. I know some of you probably think adolescence is a disease, but what it is a time of great change in the bodies of young people. And the same thing is true of aging. It is clearly a time of great challenge because our bodies are changing, but it is in and of itself not a disease, and what we need to think about is how can we promote healthy aging. That's the issue, I think, for us, and the opportunity, because we see tremendous examples every day of healthy aging, and that those examples are increasing. People still die, of course, but there are different ways to die, and our concern when we launched Healthy People 2010 was that, yes, it's great that we have increased the life expectancy of Americans, and that the fastest growing group of people are over 80. However, it's not great that almost 50% of the people in this country over 80 are incapacitated, physically, mentally, or both. And our target then in this goal was to change that, because we knew that we can change it. But there are some barriers, of course, to healthy aging. I want to just mention a few of them. Lifestyles that include tobacco, for example. People who smoke at any age compromise, of course, healthy aging. Obesity, an epidemic in this country, which we pointed out in the Surgeon General's report in the year 2001. Obesity in children, obesity in adults is a major challenge to healthy aging. Depression, which is often undiagnosed and untreated at various stages in life, including and especially in the older years, can be a major barrier to healthy aging. So there are barriers that we need to target when it comes to what does it take to ensure that our aging is healthy and it's not a disease. So those are things that we are targeting, the things that we can prevent, the things that we can promote, the things that we can diagnose and treat early, so that we can prevent there being barriers to healthy aging. I want to talk a little bit about some of the opportunities I think we have then for promoting healthy aging. This is the Surgeon General's prescription, which we first developed in 1999 for an international conference on health promotion. I don't know if each of you have a copy of this, but they were out front, I think. But anyway, at some point, take a look at it. Clearly we know that there are ways that we can promote healthy aging, and we need to start as young as possible. That's the first message. In a sense, aging begins with life itself, and therefore we have to actually plan for healthy aging, and that planning has to start in early childhood, as early as we can start, because that's how to assure healthy aging. By the same token, we know that there are some people who are at greater risk for health problems, such as diabetes and depression, because of their family history or what have you. And when we know that, of course, that means that we have to pay a special attention to that. When I was in office, diabetes was a major issue then, and it's even more so now. But we did a study between the CDC and the NIH in which we followed, especially African Americans and American Indians, who have the highest risk for diabetes, even though all groups in our population have that risk. And what we were able to demonstrate was that even for people who had a high risk of diabetes, they had a family history and all those things, if we could implement a program of physical activity and good nutrition, we could reduce the onset of diabetes by more than 60%. We demonstrated that in the late 90s and early 2000s. And so we know that there are some things we can do, even in people who are at high risk. We can make a difference in terms of what actually happens to them. Cancer, same thing. We used to think that cancer was a death sentence, and of course, we now know that most cancers are preventable, first, and second, we know that when people are diagnosed with cancer, it's not a death sentence. We made a lot of progress. So all of those things we know. But take a look at the prescription when you get a chance, because really it would encourage you to respond. It's never too late, and that's the good news. Even though the earlier you start working on healthy aging, it's never too late to improve your experience as an elderly person. I'm becoming more of an expert on this topic every day. And so it's never too late, but it does require work. It does require a commitment to physical activity, not a weekend thing, not golfing on the weekend, which is great. It requires at least 5 days a week, 30 minutes a day, physical activity, and the kind of physical activity, of course, that exercises the whole body, especially the heart. I would really encourage that regardless of your age. We're finding that even in nursing homes, when people are generally considered to be, incapacitated last stage, physical activity can reduce falls in the elderly, give them more balance, reduce depression, and even with Alzheimer's, which is one of the really real challenges that we now face. 10% of people above the age of 65 have Alzheimer's, but once you get to the age of 80, almost 50%. But it doesn't have to be that way. In order to change that, we've got to change lifestyles. We've got to invest more in research. I want to make that point. We spend about $3 to $4 billion a year in age research, which I'm a strong supporter of, but we spend less than $500 million a year in Alzheimer's research. And I think that's a policy that we need to look at, since so many Americans are going to be suffering from Alzheimer's in the future, the way it's going now. I'll stop there, but we'll be happy to respond to questions.
Dr. Satcher, just a follow-up question. You've talked a little bit about the struggles facing an aging population and the work that y'all are doing with regards to health disparities and quality of life. What do you see sort of in the big picture? How is this, the fact that our population is aging and that those numbers are getting so high, how is that going to affect our broader community? What do you see as being some of the major challenges and opportunities that will come out of that process?
That's a great question. I think the answer will depend on how much progress we're able to make in moving toward healthy aging. Obviously, the aging population is a tremendous resource, given their experience and the need for somebody to actually be there for the younger generation. it's a tremendous resource. However, if the aging population is increasingly unhealthy and dependent, then it becomes a burden for families. Most of the care for Alzheimer's patients is provided by families. Every day in this country, family members quit work so that they can take care of the family member who has dementia or Alzheimer's. And so I think the answer to that question depends on how aggressively we move forward in this country toward programs to enhance healthy aging. And that includes, not just research, but rewarding healthy behavior. Many of our corporations, Johnson & Johnson, AT&T, and others, have now started programs to reward their employees who decide to quit smoking, who begin physical activity programs, who lose weight, because number one, they know that it means lower health care costs, but the major benefits actually are to the individual who adopt a healthy lifestyle. It's tremendous. Mentally and physically, I released the first ever Surgeon General's report on mental health in 1999, and we defined mental health as the successful performance of mental functions in such a way that one could be productive in his or her life, in such a way that one could deal with adversity, and that one could adapt to change. That's what we call mental health, the ability to adapt to all of these changes that take place in our lives, and that's certainly true when it comes to aging.
Thank you so much. Well, I think we'll move on. Dr. Miller, would you like to? Dr. Miller has slides for us to help explain.
So Dr. Satcher set me up very nicely.
Yes.
One, promoting more funds for research. That's good. And as a father of 6 who just returned from spring break, I can attest that adolescence is a disease. So let's see, which way am I going to turn here? We don't have the middle screen up. So my research is focused on neurodegeneration, and I was recruited back here to Emory about 9 years ago. Alan Levy, who's the chair of neurology, was instrumental, one, in my training, because I did my postdoctoral fellowship with him, but also in recruiting me back to the Center for Neurodegenerative Disease. So we have a group of investigators that study all these different diseases, and I've had great interactions with the group at the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, the Parkinson's researchers, even in the Department of Neurology, Huntington's disease, ALS. Jonathan Glass is a good friend of mine, runs the ALS clinic. And one of the things that's very interesting about these diseases is they seem to have some very common molecular features of the disease. And so even though we're studying different diseases, many of the pathways overlap quite a bit. And so Emory really gains a lot by collaborating on these issues and not just studying each disease in isolation, because there's some very common things that occur when you have brain dysfunction. My lab is primarily focused on Parkinson's disease, though, and I'll talk about some of these common features here, but this is the second most common neurodegenerative disorder after Alzheimer's. It's characterized by tremor, really slow movement. Bradykinesia just means slow movement, postural instability, and the biggest risk factor is age. The older you get, the more likely you are to get Parkinson's disease. Very clearly, the highest risk factor. I became interested in this because of this history of pesticide exposure being linked to it, which showed this very strong environmental input to the disease. And we know there's some genetic factors involved also, but the fact that you have this very clear environmental contributor to it creates a very intriguing research problem. And then also, people that have a family history of neurological disorders. It doesn't have to be Parkinson's disease. If you have a family history of Alzheimer's, ALS, you're more likely to get Parkinson's. So there's something about the aging brain and the healthy brain that we can learn from these other disorders. Interestingly, there's a couple protective factors. One, it's almost hard to mention, but people that smoke cigarettes have a lower incidence of Parkinson's disease. And it's not because they die before they get it. When you do all the age adjustments, people have a lower incidence. And so, well, we're never going to promote people smoking because it increases the likelihood of like 500 other diseases. It does mean that there must be something about the behavior of smoking or something in the cigarette smoke that provides some sort of protective action to the brain. And so would there be some way of isolating those compounds, right? Because there's thousands of compounds in cigarette smoke, and the odds of one of them being good isn't crazy. And so there is some research being on like what sort of things are in the tobacco smoke that might be protective, but clearly we're not going to be recommending that. Caffeine consumption, which hopefully everyone's had their coffee today, is also been shown to reduce the incidence of Parkinson's disease. And you'll see this little ad here: drink coffee, do stupid things faster with more energy. That's how I try to live my academic life. But what's interesting in Parkinson's disease, again, it's a disease of aging. And what we know is that the neurons in the brain that make the neurotransmitter dopamine die as we age. And it doesn't matter, not even if you have Parkinson's disease, is that everyone's neurons in that section of the brain that we're concerned about die as you get older. If we all live to be about 110, we'll reach this threshold where we'll start having symptoms. But what happens is some people, either through a genetic risk factor or having like a head trauma type incident or exposure to pesticides or some combination of dietary factors, you accelerate that process. And so the idea is that there are a lot of things that are going on here, that there's opportunities to intervene to slow down that process. And so even if a person had an exposure or some sort of a traumatic event, the idea is if you could slow down that slope, you might be able to stave off the disease until much longer. And so even though you have to lose about 80% of these cells to get the symptoms, that does still mean there's 20% left. And if there's some way of getting those 20% to remain healthy, you could really push off the incidence of the disease. One of my interests, again, with the pesticides, one of the challenging research questions is that the only thing common about pesticides is that we deliberately put them into our environment to kill something. That's what they are. Right? I mean, it could be plants, it could be fire ants, insects, plants, all these different things in your driveway, fungus, but they're all very diverse chemicals. And so lumping them together as pesticides isn't very helpful for research questions. So my lab spent a lot of time trying to tease out which of these classes might be more involved. And I'm not going to go into that research. What I'll talk about some now is the usefulness of animal research in studying these diseases. We can't perform really detailed invasive experiments on humans. We have to use animals to look at some of these things. And my lab spent a lot of time developing new models of Parkinson's disease. And this is one paper we published. Dr. Mike Caudle, first author, after a postdoc in Seattle, is now back on the faculty here in the School of Public Health. But what we did was we genetically engineered these mice to have this one particular protein reduced in function. And it was one that we knew the pesticides targeted. So we were trying to make kind of a genetic model of the environmental exposure. And this protein called VMAT2 is what's responsible for putting dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine into vesicles. And so if you think about things like depression, right, you take SSRIs, which is a serotonin reuptake inhibitor, to get more serotonin out there. And it just turns out this protein does all the dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine. So it has a lot of important roles in controlling brain function. But what we see in these animals is that they develop a movement phenotype. They actually have the bradykinesia shuffled gait we see in Parkinson's. They lose the particular neurons in the brain, and those dopamine neurons in this area called the substantia nigra, progressively. And they develop some of the other pathologies we see in it. So what's important here is that when you have these animal models, one, you can start thinking about new interventions to slow that progression, whether it be a pharmaceutical or an activity. So a few years ago, my lab demonstrated that exercise through treadmill running of mice decreased the likelihood of them getting these lesions from various chemicals we use to produce Parkinson's disease. So that's something, there is quite a bit of data coming out now that people that exercise or are more active have a lower incidence of the disease. So there are some actions we can take that are very consistent with other reductions in other diseases. And so what we see in these animals, the main point to look at here is that this bottom right of the left 6 shows these neurons that die in human Parkinson's disease going away in these animals as they age. Same thing we see. But one of the really interesting points in this slide is the bottom right corner shows another area of the brain degenerating called the locus coeruleus. And this is the area that makes norepinephrine. So norepinephrine is the target of the tricyclic antidepressants. And we know norepinephrine has a lot of different features. And people in the Parkinson's field don't talk a lot about this, but pathologically, that region of the brain also dies in human Parkinson's disease. And so, again, we focus so much on Parkinson's on the movement disorder, the tremors and the inability to move. We spend more time talking about that. But it turns out people with Parkinson's disease have many non-motor symptoms. They have a much higher incidence of depression. They have GI disturbances, loss of sense of smell, increased anxiety. And so because our animals have, we think, a better recapitulation of the loss of dopamine, norepinephrine, and to a degree serotonin, that maybe they would have had some of these features. And so again, acknowledging the people in my lab do these things. Tanya Taylor was a graduate student in my lab. She's now at Oxford continuing her postdoctoral studies on Parkinson's disease. But what she showed was that these mice had many of those non-motor symptoms as well. So they had the loss of sense of smell, they had increased anxiety, they had the sleep problems, the GI disturbances, and they also had an increased sign of depression. Now, what a depression is in a mouse, it's a tricky thing, but there are signs of things that are very consistent with it. And these animals who had this depressive phenotype would be corrected by using classical antidepressants. And so, if a person with Parkinson's has a higher incidence of depression, and that's actually higher than people with other devastating neurological disorders. It's not just that they're sick. There's something in Parkinson's where it's worse. That you're starting to see is like, what is it about this molecule that we're disturbing that is causing these various features? And so then it starts getting to this point is that, well, not only does that maybe explain that Parkinson's is much more than this dopamine system, it's these other neurotransmitters as well, is that does that start opening up the potential therapeutic avenues for it? Are there other things we can be targeting besides the dopamine system to treat the disease? And so that's one of the things my lab is now working on, is we've figured out a way to see how that protein I study, VMAT2, works. And so what you see up there on the top screen is these green, I have this green compound, so fluorescent molecule, that is packaged by that same protein. It's brought into the cell and packaged into those little vesicles. And that TBZ thing you think called tetrabenazine is something used to treat Huntington's disease. It decreases the hyperkinetic activities in Huntington's disease. But if you look closely, you'll see that things change as you go across and add tetrabenazine. Turns out tetrabenazine blocks my protein, VMAT2. And so then we take these cells and we label their VMAT2 red. And so the next layer is there are these red glowing neurons with the VMAT2 in them. And the last panel is when you merge these things together. So if you look at the bottom left, you see quite a bit of yellow. It's very clear on my computer screen. I don't know how with the lighting you see, but you see this co-localization of the fluorescent molecule and my VMAT2 protein. And if you add the inhibitor of VMAT, that goes away, that distribution goes away. And so what that lets us do is now set up a high throughput screen to look for drugs that actually make VMAT2 work better. And so the idea is if you could do that, you would increase the storage of dopamine, making the therapy of Parkinson's, which is the precursor of dopamine, last longer. And you think about things like intractable depression. People that have low levels of serotonin, norepinephrine, or dopamine, is this a way to kind of boost those overall levels of these neurotransmitters to get better function out of people that have these various disorders? And so now we're trying to go through and set up kind of this high throughput drug screen to look at these things. And it's one of the various research projects we have going on. Some other things that we're doing on the intervention side, I'm talking about some of the collaborative activities we have here at Emory. So this NIH has this Udall Parkinson's program, and we decided to apply for this about a year and a half ago. And what's really nice about this is that it involves investigators from the Yerkes Primate Center, the Department of Biology in the college, Department of Pharmacology in the School of Medicine, and my laboratory here in the School of Public Health, and an investigator at Vanderbilt. And the idea was to look at the various circuitry changes that occur in Parkinson's disease and look for new interventions. And what you see on the bottom right here is a new class of compounds that a colleague of mine developed that's based on the growth factor type thing you may have been hearing about in some clinical trials, where rather than worrying about injecting things into the brain, which is what they're currently doing, or having to use gene therapy, we found an orally acting drug that does the same thing, we think. And so this work here was done by Dr. Kenny Shepard, who is now an assistant professor at Morehouse in the Department of Pharmacology, continuing some of this work. But it's also really nice is that this program has quite a bit of outreach and education in it. So later in May, we have a Parkinson's community forum where we'll probably have 150 people from the community come speak to the scientists and physicians on this project about the research that we're doing and talking about these various things. And so we really focus a lot on taking that knowledge we're gaining in the laboratory and getting it not just out to the research community, but also to the medical community and to the community at large and the families that are affected by these disorders. So that's all I have to say. I'll be happy to take any questions even afterwards. We'll take a tour of my lab later on. I'll be around for a while if people want to ask more questions about it. So,
Thank you, Dr. Miller. And like with Dr. Satcher, I just have a small follow-up question, and you sort of teed it up nicely. In talking about collaboration, and you talked about the collaboration that's being done within Parkinson's research and some of the work being done here at Emory, can you talk about it broader along the lines of the collaboration being done along the spectrum of neurodegenerative diseases? I know that there's some work being done where you're sharing just how research now is possibly changed from how it was maybe 20 years ago, how y'all are collaborating together to really move this forward and to make some great strides.
Well, I think the biggest thing is illustrated by the Center for Neurodegeneration here at Emory that Alan Levy headed up, is that, again, it's bringing researchers from all these different areas to work on some of these common mechanisms. And if you look back from when that started, it was just about 10 years ago, the number of really multidisciplinary grants that have been funded that just wouldn't have happened if he didn't bring these people together to work in very close proximity on these problems. And I think that that sort of non-departmental based, non-individual lab-based research is how we're going to move things forward, by really bringing these things together. An example was that there was a new gene identified in Parkinson's that appeared to be involved in inflammation in the immune system. And so I went to the chair of immunology, who doesn't know anything about neurodegeneration, and said, you know, I know you're an expert in this this area of immunology, and we submitted a couple grants already on that. You know, so we were able to pull in people that weren't even classically involved in neurodegeneration, because those were the key questions that had to be addressed.
Nancy, would you like to
Sure.
take us to our next?
And again, what a wonderful segue, because what I was going to start off with as a opening statement was that we in the aging and healthcare community that provides services for our older adults and their families. One of the things that we need to do a better job, is that on? Yes. Is collaboration and communication among ourselves, just like Dr. Miller was talking about with the researchers. Just because I might be a home delivered meals provider and someone else is providing home care services or discharge planning in a hospital, we can't stay in our own little silos. We've got to be able to figure out how to communicate and work together so that when we're working with the same family, there is shared information and we all have the same goal, and there's not 10 different ways of providing care. So I would like to share with you that in the Atlanta region, we are known somewhat nationally for the great work we do in aging. We work a lot with the Atlanta Regional Commission Area Agency on Aging, our county-based aging programs, our home health agencies as a hospital system. But we also, in doing this good collaborative work, have discovered how many gaps there are in the service that we do provide. So I would say if there's one thing that the Atlanta region can do is to pull together and figure out how do we approach problems from a team collaborative effort. And I'll give you a couple of examples. The other overall statement I'd like to make is we cannot provide services with an older adult without including the family. My 30-some years in aging in the Atlanta region, I always ask the question when we hear that we're going to be working with an older adult, is their family in town? Is the family involved? How strong is the family structure? And we've got to address people holistically. So the support for the family, I cannot say that enough. Gotta have it, gotta have it, gotta have it. And if there is not family support, then we've got to figure out where those support structures can come from. And I'm speaking from a community hospital perspective. We are fortunate enough to have a community older adult program based in a hospital, we see the older adult at their most vulnerable point. When they come to us and when they leave us, those are all points of vulnerability. And there is a term, program, best practice model known nationally as care transitions. And Dr. Eric Coleman, he's a geriatrician and also master's in public health, Boulder, Colorado, University of Colorado in Boulder, that has done a fabulous job of taking this best practice model on the road, if you will. And again, Atlanta has come to the forefront. We are invited to national conferences to talk about what we are doing with care transitions. But basically, it is what we've been talking about. It is making sure when that patient, client, family moves from one care provider to the next, that things do not fall between the cracks, if you will. So our communication flow and our system is seamless. That's our goal, and I think we can get there, but it isn't as easy as it sounds. We've been diving into this now for several years, and we've made a lot of strides, but there's a lot still to do. So if there's one thing we can do to have an impact on healthy aging, it is to inform and educate and support our families. We would like to get to them before they come into our emergency department so that informed decisions can be made. When you're in an emergency department or just getting ready to be discharged from a hospital, you are bombarded with information. No one can absorb it all. So we've got to have systems in place that provides that follow-up back into the community or home setting that supports that plan of care, supports the family and the older adult and the other care providers to make sure that it's carried out. Great example of that is someone is in the hospital, older adults in the hospital, they are newly diagnosed with some chronic disease. It might be congestive heart failure. They already had a couple when they came to us that they were trying to manage. So we are discharging them. The doctors put them on a new medication. No one has asked or looked into what is the cost of this new medication. We just know it's really good and the patient needs to go home with it. So we don't know the cost, nor have we asked the patient, can you afford this new medication at $800 a month? We just had a case like this a few weeks ago, and the person bounced back in the emergency department because they never filled the prescription. Couldn't afford it. And so we've got to start asking those questions and making sure that everything is covered. The other point I'd like to make is that, well, we all know the healthcare system today is really kind of crazy. Until it calms down and we all are a little more certain where the future is going, I know it creates a lot of unsettling feelings and a little anxiety on us on the inside. I can only imagine what it's like to be a patient, particularly with trying to get access to a physician. We get probably 2 to 3 calls a day, that's not an exaggeration, from older adults on Medicare that their doctor has retired, they're new to the community, they just want to come to our healthcare system, and they can't find a physician that will take new Medicare referrals. And this is not just at my hospital. I think, and I would ask Dr. Satcher and Dr. Miller, I think the problem's going to get worse before it gets better. I've just turned 64, my husband's 66. I purposely found us a young physician because I'm going to be retiring soon and I'm going to be on Medicare. And I was frightened that I could not get the doctor of my choice. These are all things that we as a community need to address, but we've got to do it in a collaborative fashion. And the one thing that is very strong out in the community right now is our Care Transitions Work Group. We've got a team of folks, providers in healthcare and aging services from the 11-county area. We meet monthly, and we talk about best practice models and what works, what doesn't work, and how can we all approach this in a consistent fashion. An example, we know that everybody needs a personal health record. When you come to the emergency room, visit your doctor, whatever, everything needs to be written down and it needs to come with you. It makes our job so much easier. So one of the things we've worked on is what is the information that needs to be in that personal health record. We don't care what it looks like, but we do care that all of us have the expectation that this is the information I need to bring to you, my health care provider, and this is the information I expect my patients to bring me. That's a big job right there, but if we can continue to get that message out to the community, it's those little things, I think, that work together to make a big impact. Again, I'll just mention one more time, support, work with the family. Really important, particularly with families that are dealing with dementia and memory loss, which is about 70% of the folks we work with. And that I don't know what to do, I don't know where to turn, is just a very frightening experience. And so we in healthcare have got to respond to that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nancy. So to follow up, you talked a lot about getting the message out, working with families, making sure people were aware. What sort of other advocacy work are you seeing, or y'all participating in to really try to get that word out and to really try to change the system so that we can move forward into something better?
There's a lot of different things. I'll mention a couple. One is through this collaborative effort with the Care Transitions Work Group, we've developed a packet of information. And volunteers have been trained actually through our Area Agency on Aging and through our work group team. Any of us can go out and do programs to senior groups, family groups, whatever, on negotiating and understanding the healthcare system. There's handouts for you, but one of the things we have is this booklet on when I go to the hospital. Very few people realize that when they get to the hospital that it isn't going to be their doctor of many years. It's going to be there to direct their care. It's going to be somebody they've never laid eyes on, called a hospitalist. So my anxiety level is already up to here, and then I'm expecting Dr. Dunleavy to walk in the room, and it's Dr. Smith, who I don't even know who he is, and all of a sudden he's going to be in charge of me. So my anxiety level goes up even higher. So I think those the opportunities to educate folks in groups with how to understand your healthcare system. Do you have an advance directive? That is our mantra. Do you have an advance directive for healthcare? If you don't, and you're sitting in this room, shame on you, shame on us. Go fill one out. It's the kindest thing you can do to yourself and your loved ones and your healthcare providers. But getting words like that out. Also, starting those conversations. Have you talked about end of life? Does your family and your doctor and your healthcare provider understand what your value system is for yourself at the end of life? We probably, many of us will disagree on that, but it needs to be discussed, and it needs to be discussed with your family and your physician. That's another one of our big messages out there. So we have both written and also presentations that we're taking out into the community.
Thank you so much. Sandra.
Hi.
Hi.
Good morning, everybody. Quality Living Service is a nonprofit organization incorporated in 1985 to address the needs of seniors in the Southwest Atlanta area and to help them gain access to services. Our participants are age 55 and older, many who are also volunteers. Each Monday morning we have an empowerment meeting where information is given out to help seniors advocate for themselves. The center offers transportation, leisure time activity, opportunities for socialization and recreation. We have a fleet of 8 buses. We contract with the state to provide transportation, and we also contract with housing authorities to provide recreational and leisure time activities to their seniors. QLS operates 4 communities, 3 senior centers, and 1 intergenerational community. And the intergenerational community is 1/3 senior citizens. Now, of course, aging in place is wonderful, and most people would hope that as they age that they could remain in the home or the community of their choice. But as we know, as your need for more and more services increase, a senior loses the level of control of their lives, and oftentimes they must move to a facility where these services are offered. Now, at our community, like I said, we have 4. Seniors begin usually at about age 88, where they need supportive services, basically housekeeping, laundry, meal preparation, and eventually many of them may need personal services, your activities of daily living, bathing, washing, toileting, transferring, these kinds of services. Medicare and Medicaid will pay for a home health agency to provide some of these services, but it must be medically related. And it's for a limited number of hours or weeks. So other than that, the senior or the senior's family would be able to provide this service or at least pay for the services from someone else. Now, as Nancy stated, you know, you want to get to know the family support system, but many seniors do not have a very good support system. Many of them outlive their support system. Next, you have some seniors who must move in with family members. And as we know, seniors are living longer. The adult child is usually the main caregiver, and the adult child is often a senior herself, or she is sandwiched between supporting her aging parents and caring for her dependent children and grandchildren. Another option for seniors are personal care homes. Now, in the state of Georgia, all personal care homes are to be regulated through the state and licensed, but we have many care homes that are operating under the radar. They're not licensed, and for very good reasons, because they do not want to meet the demands that the state have put on them. Now, Medicare and Medicaid will pay, but the for a care in a personal care home, but Medicaid pays $574 a month, and it means that the senior must come up with whatever difference. Many personal care homes do not accept Medicare or Medicaid. And then we have assisted living communities, which basically are more than 24 units. Now, in the state of Georgia, all 24-hour living facilities are regulated in the state under the name of personal care homes. So even though we have assisted living, in the state of Georgia, the regulations, they're regulated as personal care homes. Most assisted living facilities are for profit. Most assisted living facilities will not accept Medicaid and Medicare. The average cost of assisted living in the state of Georgia is $3,000 a month. Low and very low income persons cannot afford this unless you have a family support system who can help finance this, or you have long-term health insurance. You will not be able to live at an assisted living communities. So where do all of our low-income people go when they do not have the funds to support themselves to remain in their own homes or their own communities, where they do not have a family support system, and that they cannot go to a personal care home? You said, you're right, they are in the nursing home. And even though in our nursing homes our condition is to be medical related, and as Dr. Satcher said, that aging is not a disease, The nursing home is the only place that our seniors end up. They would prefer not to be there because seniors who need just custodial care still want recreation and socialization. So at QLS, we offer 2 programs. One is we call SWAP, which means Support with Aging in Place, where we provide 2 to 4 hours a day to seniors who are aging in place. Usually, we have the services of a CNA. And the CNA, now, if the senior needs more than 4 hours, we cannot help them. We look around for other support, and like I said, this would be a candidate who would end up in the nursing home. We have our in-home support program, whereby we train many of our volunteers, and they become in-home workers where they can do housekeeping, laundry, and we pay them a stipend. This program runs pretty good. Now, we do have a waiting list for each program. But like I said, this is what we've been able to do to assist our seniors to age in place. Right now in the Georgia legislature in the House, there is a bill to make assisted living another level of care in the state of Georgia. And perhaps once assisted living is here, perhaps the legislature will go back and look at funding. Because right now, most funding goes to the nursing homes, and they're paid $4,000 a month to care for these patients who would normally prefer to age in place in another place. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Can you tell me a little bit about how your seniors find you in order to know to go to you to receive these services? And then what you do, you mentioned having waiting lists for your programs. I imagine there's a much higher demand for the services that you and others provide than there is the capacity to hold it. What you do when seniors are coming to you looking for that help and you're not able to serve them at that time.
Right. Number one, like I said, we are 26 years old, so we no longer need to market ourselves. I think that people in the area know us well. I think people in the aging, aging agencies know us well, so we get many, many referrals. And like I said, we have a waiting list, and I guess maybe our goal would be that we would not have a waiting list. We have people come to us every day looking for services, and people are shocked many times when we're unable to help because they assume that Medicare and Medicare are the agencies that would help fund these services. And many of our programs are funded through grants. Like I said, we do contract with the state and with housing agencies that we do have some funds that we can add to increasing our need for increasing the support that seniors need. But Barrett, a lot of people we just cannot help because we don't have the funds. And we just put them on the waiting list. And when an opening occurs, that it's the next person on the waiting list. But many people, like I said, they end up having to live in the nursing home.
Patty, will you round us out?
All right. Well, I'm here to talk about the Southeastern Council Foundation's engagement initiative. And I do need a visual, because if you see the word engagement, the AGE is in all caps. There have been some statistics, everybody stole my thunder with statistics, about the 77 million baby boomers that are turning 65, or a group of them are. The number that impressed me the most when I took on this work was that January 1st of this year, 11,000 of those 77 million turned 65. And every day since then, and every day of every week of every month for the next 20 years, 11,000 people will turn 65. The age wave is the age tsunami that is about to hit us. I looked up some Georgia population statistics, and unfortunately the 2010 statistics are only available for redistricting, and they're not into the aging information yet. But based on some 2005 estimates, the general population in Georgia will increase 46.8% between 2000 and 2030. The aging population during that time frame will increase by 143%. So again, you're back to the 1 in 5 or 20%. So that's going to impact all aspects of family and community life. And those of us working in the community have to come up with a range of personal, institutional, and societal responses to the aging population. And you have almost these two subsets of the aging population. You have those that are in the early years, in their 60s and their 70s, and they tend to be very productive and making contributions through volunteerism and so forth in the community. And then you have those that, as they progress in their 80s, we are living longer, and they are needing more services to stay in place. There is an organization called Grantmakers in Aging, and their focus, these are foundations that focus on aging issues. And they have a program called the Engagement Initiative. And the Southeastern Council was fortunate to be selected last year to participate in this initiative. The Atlantic Philanthropies is funding it, and the local match for us has been from several states in the Southeast: the Patterson Foundation, the Community Foundation in Jacksonville, Healthcare Georgia Foundation, and the Richmond Memorial Health Foundation. So you can see some of these health groups are very interested in this topic. So now that we're a member, what are we trying to do? And that's to implement education and awareness activities that we hope will increase grant making that is focused on aging issues. The goal is to position the Southeast grant makers on the cutting edge of lifespan issues. To see where we were, to know if you're progressing, you got to know where you are now. So back in October, we did a benchmark study among the grant makers who are members of the Southeastern Council to find out about current practices and current interest in aging issues. We had a number of key findings, and there is a copy of an article in your packet to provide further information, but I just wanted to hit on a few. Aging is already a focus area for 4 out of 10 foundations that responded, okay? But it is a second-tier issue, and it does not receive a lot of overall funding, tends to receive 5% or less of a grant maker's funds. Foundations that currently include aging as one of their focus areas, they focus within that on healthy aging and access to health care. But for the most part, familiarity with issues and programs in the aging category is low. Well, we're really not interested. But if you talk to them further and start talking about specific things, aging in place, health care, contributions to the community, social activities, and so forth, there is more interest in these specific things. And they all see that, oh, we could use this information in a lot of ways. If we know more about aging, it gives us another lens to look at other programs. You know, if you are interested in funding programs for children, think about the number of grandparents that are raising their grandchildren and issues like that. So it crosses all lines with an elder-friendly community is a family-friendly community. So, but that was some, some interesting things that we learned from that. So the way we are pursuing our mission at the Southeastern Council in terms of this particular program is we're trying to educate. And one, we're trying to use the web, use media. We have an online community at the Southeastern Council website, and members can see notices of monthly webinars. They can access resources. We put up statistics. We put up studies there. They can read and write on the wall. I just love all this new jargon about, but anyway, it's like a bulletin board where you can put up information, and you can identify and email colleagues that have similar interests. We have a core interest group that grant makers can join, and they receive periodic emails about webinars or meetings or resources. One of the things that we started this year is a monthly educational teleconference webinar on the third Wednesday of each month from 3 to 4 p.m. That's it. So it always takes place then. And each webinar will explore some aspect of the aging issue and its impact on communities. And this is free, and anybody can join through membership. And I'm going to tell you how the people here who might not have freestanding foundations can join in. But because of the community foundation, you can join in. And the reverse side of that is not only are we educating people, we're providing foundations with a showcase for what they are doing related to the various aging issues. And also at the Southeastern Council's annual meeting, which takes place in November of each year, the Engagement Initiative is responsible for 3 of the sessions. We were very honored to be given that many slots there. So how can you be involved? As someone with a donor-advised fund at the Community Foundation, you can participate in the online community. You can participate in the webinars that we're having. If you don't want to join the online community, all you have to do is tell Aaron or Barrett they're members and they know, and they can keep you informed about things that might be of interest to you. And another thing, that if you, through the Community Foundation, are funding a program that you think is particularly doing particularly well, or you've learned a lot from the process or whatever, I would love to talk with you about doing one of the webinars. I have another 12 months to fill up. So let me end by telling you about what we have on the schedule for webinars. April 20th, the Duke Endowment is hosting a program on PACE, which is the program for the all-inclusive care of the elderly. And this session will provide perspectives of the funder and a service provider. On May 18th, we're 95% sure that the Jesse Parker Williams Foundation is going to host a program on late life depression. Mary can add to that if she would like to. June is to be determined, and July, the Community Foundation in Jacksonville is doing a program on assistance for seniors in financial crisis, something their community foundation is trying to address. And then we will continue to do these. And at the Southeastern Council meeting in November, we will have a session on the impact of the age wave on community, a session on dimensions of caregiving, and a session on economics of aging. So that's what we're trying to do in terms of getting the word out about you need to think about aging as you are deciding on your investments in the community.
Thank you so much, Patty. Would you say that you've seen, I know you've done the survey and y'all have been reaching out to the funding community in the Southeast. Has there been a pretty positive response, that you're seeing a good bit of interest, that people are really identifying this, funders in particular, identifying aging and aging-related issues as something to really start looking at? Or are you building the interest and moving forward, or is it still too early to say?
One, I think it's a little too early to say, and we're still building interest. However, when I came on board in September, we had 20 people signed up to get our emails about this, and now we have close to 30. And so, and the fact that at the last session at the Southeastern Council's annual meeting, we had one session, a luncheon, and we have been granted 3 sessions in the other. So there are various ways to measure our progress, but and we hope to do another survey toward the end of the grant period. I don't think that we'll be able to show any increases in dollar amounts and that sort of thing, but I think we will be able to show that the knowledge level has increased.
We're going to take a small break from our agenda because Jim Curran is here and thought he might like to say a few words, the Dean of the Rollins School of Public Health, and hopefully thank everyone for being here, and then we'll go into questions and answers, I promise. Y'all will get your chance to ask questions in just a minute.
Well, thanks. It's always dangerous to give me a podium.
Here you go.
Here we go. I've got my book.
So I have basically 3 things I wanted to do. I wanted to welcome you. First of all, I want to thank you for your support of our community here in Atlanta. And I think the challenge will be even greater in the future. And I want to say a couple philosophical remarks about that. And aging is perhaps our greatest challenge going into the future. Part of the thank you goes to my old boss, David Satcher, who, as we aged together, used to be a couple years older than I was, for his outstanding leadership in health and public health in the United States as well as in Atlanta. And to Alicia Phillip, who has been a hero for a long time, back in the early days of the AIDS epidemic. This is now the 30th anniversary of AIDS. Alicia and the Community Foundation of Atlanta developed community programs which were really the forerunner of the Ryan White care program in the United States, done throughout Georgia and in the city of Atlanta. And this is the 20th anniversary of the Ryan White Care Act and also Ryan White's death. He was a hemophiliac who died of AIDS. So I think the Community Foundation deserves a lot of credit for providing AIDS services not only in Georgia but also as a forerunner to the United States. This is the Clayman Room of the Claudia Nance Rollins Building of the Rollins School of Public Health. In general, we are people who work in the community a lot. We have 1,100 graduate students. Almost all of our students work in the community, either in Georgia or in Atlanta. Many of our faculty work either in the community or on problems that relate to community health. And so we are largely recipients of philanthropy rather than philanthropists. But we really value what you do for that reason, because we are committed to the same goal. Now, can I just philosophize a little bit about aging?
Yes,
okay.
Please. We'd love for you to.
Here's the aging philosophy. My background is epidemiology. And epidemiology, we're always thinking about populations and time periods. It's kind of the curse of vision. It's sort of thinking about where are we going and where are we coming and things like this. And I think that we will depend upon the gratitude and generosity of individuals in our community and community organizations more than most societies. The United States is not known for its outstanding governmental policies domestically. We have a lot of wealth, our politicians have a lot of opportunities, but they can barely tie their shoes from my point of view. If you look at the budget impasse we have now, we have all of these grown adults arguing over nothing, it seems to me, about whether the government shuts down or not, when there are huge problems facing our country that they're simply unwilling to deal with. And they do have political obstacles to dealing with these. But they're all thinking about the re-election of the president and a lot of things like that, which are really, in the long run, not the main issue. And one of the main issues is the demographic shift in society. It's not aging per se, it's the lack of young people, both to pay the bills and to keep the trains running. Now, when we talk about aging, we are not honest about it. I'm 66. That means I've already aged. I fit all of these population characteristics here that says I'm over 65. But of course, we don't think of it that way. We think of ourselves, as long as we're healthy, as aging means people older than us. So, you know, that's down the road. And unfortunately, our healthcare system and our public policies treat it the same way, with the exception of the age of retirement and Social Security and things like this. More than 50% of the people in Atlanta's hospitals today are over 65. So more than half of our resources that are being spent on healthcare are over 65. The driver of Medicaid benefits in every state in the country is nursing homes. That's most of the Medicaid benefits. The vast majority of federal expenditures for health are for people over 65 in either Medicare or Medicaid. And the federal commitment to those programs will probably go up 10% this year. So one could say, well, what are you doing for the people, the elderly and aging, over health? Well, we've committed a 10% increase in our federal expenditures already, independent of all the crazy arguments in Washington. That's a 10% increase in what we're going to do for the health of people over 65. But all of us are willing to deny that we're part of the aging population. You couldn't get the hospital to say that really they're an aging hospital, you know, because geriatrics is really defined more narrowly at Wesley Woods into people who are over 85. And the specialty itself is marginalized outside the healthcare system. Most of that 10% increase will go to insurance companies, doctors' fees, high technology, better drugs. When in fact, if we were thinking about this from an aging perspective, we'd say, how could we best spend that 10% to help us with the demographic shift? What can we do about that? But we don't think we're aging, see? We're not really aging, we just need a knee replacement. And we want to get the best one as long as the government pays for it. We don't want health care reform because that's not necessary. That doesn't impact on the aging population. We're unwilling to deal with entitlement programs. We're unwilling to deal with tax increases. We'll just let the 40-year-olds pay for it when we get old. Folks, we're getting old, and it's going to happen. And it's going to really rely upon the community to deal with it, because the government will do it very, very reluctantly. The politicians don't have the courage to do it. I mean, if they can't even figure out how to keep the government open another day, it's going to come back to the community. And the community is going to have better scientific responses and better data upon which to form policies and to strengthen the nonprofit organizations that actually do this work. So that's why I think it's so timely what you're talking about today. And what are the health problems? They're all related to the brain and cancer. Cancer in the brain. Neurodegenerative diseases, Alzheimer's, stroke, Parkinson's. These are the things, along with cancer, that are the greatest threats to our well-being when we finally do start to age. So thank you for what you do so much, and thank you for being here, and thank you for letting me philosophize it. I feel better.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. That was the point. Thank you so much, Dr. Garvin. Well, given that, I would like to open up the floor to questions for our panel. If you will just identify if it's to a specific panelist or if it's general, but raise hands, let's go. Any questions? Oh, come on. Well, I'll start. How about that? I'll just keep talking. And this is going to be sort of a question for all of you, and hopefully maybe we'll get the ball rolling if there's some other questions. But I would like each of you to take, and I mean 30 seconds, to what would you say to the funding community about the issues that are facing our seniors, and how can that funding community be most helpful? And you can go in any order. You don't have to go down the line. So whoever feels ready to answer first, jump in.
Well, I'll start with assisted living communities. Like I said, all of them are for-profit, and most states and the federal government have loan programs for assisted living, but there's only a handful of states that have grants to develop assisted living facilities. That's why the cost is so high. We have grants to develop senior housing, but none to develop assisted living. So assisted living is just very high.
Thank you.
I would certainly support, Jim is gone, I was going to say I'm happy he feels better. But I would certainly support the issue of developing better collaboration among the various participants in dealing with the aging population. There were some really good things, and there are some really good things in healthcare reform, and one of them, of course, is the electronic health records, a mechanism for really better coordinating the care that people receive. And I served on the Alzheimer's study group, and we recommended that families be included in that electronic health record. You know, obviously you can limit what information is provided to whom, but families need to have more information about how their loved ones are doing, and vice versa. The provider community needs to hear more from the families about their experience at home. We now have the technology to do this. Medicine is behind, banking is behind just about every other area when it comes to this information sharing and the use of the technology that we have. So I think we can make a lot of progress by better supporting families that are involved in the care of older persons, better educating people who are aging, better providing information for people to be physically active on a regular basis, and good nutrition. We haven't talked much about that, but I think physical activity and good nutrition really are something that we need to invest in. In order to do that, we need to coordinate and collaborate. It's a great thing that we now even have industry like Walmart and others involved in saying we're going to make healthy foods available at more reasonable cost. So I think this coordination, collaboration. At the Satchel Leadership Institute at Morehouse, one of the things we're doing now is training community health leadership persons, people who live in the community, who spend 12 weeks with us, one full day a week, to really learn how they can be more effective at health promotion and disease prevention. At the same time, they teach us how we can be more effective at getting our knowledge from laboratory and other places into the community where it can be more effective.
I would like to tag on to that, I think, and say that one of the strongest things we can do, if I were a funder, I would want to make sure that whatever I was funding, clearly there was going to be results from. And the way that we can do that as the recipients is to make sure, I think, that we're not reinventing the wheel. There are so many great sort of grandiose ideas floating around, and I hear them every day. But you sort of bring it back to what are the best practices and models that have already proven themselves, and how do we incorporate those into what we're already doing? We already have a lot of great things in place, and I think we're just not utilizing them to their full capacity. And there's got to be a way of doing that. I go back to care transitions again. I mean, we got a federal grant at Piedmont for this project with Visiting Nurse Health Systems. And it was a 2-year grant. It was a lot of money from the federal government. And our message, commitment to the federal government and you as our taxpayers was this was going to be a sustainable program. Our reputation was on the line as a community hospital. So our goal from day one was to implement interventions and programs that could be overlaid on what we already do. We changed the way we do business. We changed the way we provide care. We learned from people that had already done it, tweaked it, proven it worked, and brought it to the Atlanta region. And then our other commitment was we spread the good word, we spread what we learned, and we grow it. It's a seed, and then we grew it. And we did that. And there's other opportunities to do so, but again, we've got to do it collaboratively as a team. And I think if I had money to fund, I would say, let's identify how the Atlanta region can work better together as a team to promote healthy aging. And if that's supporting a caregiver that has a family member with dementia, then that's all part of it. But we've got to outline those important pieces and get them going. And I went over 30 seconds.
That's okay. Patty?
Yeah. I was going to say I'm Southern. I can't say good morning in 30 seconds. Very simply, I think educating yourself on the fact that you're here today, that you're hearing about what's going on, participating in our webinars to learn what others have been doing and how what they have learned from the experience. And so educating yourself so that you have a lens to look at whatever programs you're funding with the idea of how does aging impact this issue, and what is this nonprofit doing to address that issue?
Dr. Miller? 30 seconds.
I think the biggest thing is that we need to continue to increase our knowledge base and understand what is involved in causing the diseases. But even for the diseases we have a really good idea of the risk factors, we still do a terrible job of actually at the individual level executing those things, the physical activity, the dietary things. And to me, it's like when you're looking at these sort of funding things, it has to span that whole piece of it. And I'm like the deliverables. If you actually don't have someone's behavior change at the end of the day, it doesn't really have a big impact.
Yeah, none of y'all mentioned research, and I'm curious, as a private funder, and you're saying Alzheimer's and Parkinson's are affecting, over 50% of the people over 80. So when you're thinking about funding something, do you focus on helping people currently living with these diseases have a better life, or would you also think about, is it better to put those dollars into research to find a cure for the future? I mean, that's something I think that we weigh. I know a lot of the funding is NIH and public funding, but as a private funder or a foundation, how would you think about that?
We tried to mention research. Obviously, we didn't do a good job.
Just in this, in
This
the
last
answer to this
question.
particular question. Y'all mentioned it a lot before.
Yeah, because I think that's one thing, the electronic health record, it allows us to really coordinate research. One of the big problems with Alzheimer's research is the lack of collaboration among researchers. One of the major recommendations of our Alzheimer's study group was to really develop a system for coordination among researchers so that they were much better able to speak with each other about their findings. So I think any funding that improves communication among researchers is going to move us forward. I do have a concern about the fact that a lot of times we're not using the information we have to improve the lives of people. So I think that's research too, research in how do we better bring to bear changes, measurable changes in the lives of individuals and communities based on the information that we have from the research. So that requires collaboration among researchers, not just at the molecular level, which is really important, but at the clinical level, at the health services research level, and then the community-based research, I would say.
I think it's kind of like an investment strategy. Some people like to take high risk for high gain, and I think that's your basic research, finding a cure for a disease. But a person who tends to buy bonds is the person who knows that there's individuals in the community that need help today. And if you look at the various funding foundations, like for Parkinson's disease, the Fox Foundation is very focused on basic research. The National Parkinson's Foundation is much more community research based. The American PDA does the kind of more that community side. And I think it all has to be done, but I think it's the donors, what they want to see. Are they looking for, are they the risk takers that want to see a revolution, or are they more practical looking for that day-to-day improvement?
Just as a follow-up, any predictions on finding a cure for Alzheimer's and Parkinson's in the next 20 years?
Are we still recording? Yeah, I mean, I think that we are going to see continued improvements in care. There'll be better interventions, but we will still have the diseases. There's no doubt we're going to have them. I think the best hope is really a strategy to slow the progression, because if we can have people, have 5 more years of good memory or 5 or 10 more years of good motor function, that's like really that quality of life thing that's the big improvement. So I really think that it's more of a putting it off later in life than actually an absolute cure. It's just, I think they're just the diseases are just too comprehensive. They affect too many systems that it's going to be something easily treated by a stem cell or some gene therapy. It's too multifaceted disease.
I'm a little more optimistic, and I think the Alzheimer's Study Group was a little bit more optimistic. And even since our report, I don't know if you saw the report that we released 2 years ago, 2009, but even since that report, we've made progress in identifying biomarkers for Alzheimer's disease. So one of the things that we pointed out in our report was, if we in fact had biomarkers that would allow us to identify people at risk and to diagnose it much earlier, tremendous impact that would have on cost and quality of life and treatment, because we believe the treatment can be much more effective early on. So I think I'm optimistic about what's going to happen in the next 20 years with Alzheimer's. And I believe we're going to see dramatic changes in terms of the quality of life. And a lot of people are actually not even having the onset because of our ability to intervene early with the basic mechanism.
That's encouraging. I like hearing that.
Hold me to it. I think I'll still be around.
You better hold you to it.
Well, were there any other, we have maybe time for one more question, if there's any other for the room. Well, I just want to thank our panelists. This is a really wonderful opportunity to get to hear so many different perspectives around healthy aging and what's happening in our community. And I want to thank you all for coming and joining us with this. We have a few little housekeeping things. There's an evaluation in your folder. If you would please complete it, and you can just leave it at the table. The staff will come and pick it up afterwards. It's very helpful to us so that we can continue to plan events going forward. Also want to remind you that we have a great opportunity to tour Dr. Miller's lab downstairs on the 4th floor, so it's very close. And you can really see some of what's going on behind the scenes around Parkinson's research and other research, which is fascinating. So I encourage you, if you've got the time, to go on that tour. And the last thing I will remind you, in your packets you have this little blue brochure, which is our calendar of donor events. It's got the list of everything coming up for the remainder of the year, events that we'll be hosting. So take a look at it, and if there are any that you're interested in, please contact your philanthropic advisor, Erin, Audrey, myself, or Rob, and we'd be happy to put you on the list. So thank you so much for coming. Look at this amazing, right, the grand reveal. Amazing view. The doors are open. Please feel free to wander outside with coffee if you'd like to. And thank you so much.